With so much on the line, let's bring in our stellar panel here in studio. MS Now co-host of The Weekend Primetime, Ayman Mohyeldin. MS Now senior Washington correspondent and co-host of The Weekend, Eugene Daniels. Also with us, Richard Haass, President Emerita of the Council of Foreign Relations. It is good to see you all. Do you have a sense of where this all stands at this moment? Because it is hard to parse out what we're hearing from the president, what we're hearing from the vice president.
So I spoke to some of the mediators and people who were involved in these talks who are actually leaving Switzerland. And the short answer that I got from them was optimism, but cautious optimism. And I asked them, well, what's different about this time around? And the reality is not much, other than the fact that they were able to get the Americans and the Iranians into the actual room and kind of shorten the distance between the negotiators. I think there's still a lot of uncertainty, not necessarily about the mechanism that's going to go forward between the Americans and the Iranians, but the expectations as to what happens beyond the Iranian-American situation. And I say that because the way that it was kind of characterized to me is there are two sets of negotiations taking place simultaneously. The official track between the Iranians, the Pakistanis, the Qataris, and the Americans, but then also the expectations between what Iran wants with America vis-a-vis Israel and Lebanon, and what the Americans want Iran to do vis-a-vis Hezbollah in Lebanon. So in some ways, there are the nuclear talks that are taking place, and the thing that can derail all of that is what happens on the Lebanese front between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon. So I think those talks are not getting as much attention as the talks about the Iran program.
So two questions for you. If those tracks are happening on dual tracks, is there a sense of when those two tracks begin to merge? And two, in both rooms, are they just trying to treat Donald Trump like a non-entity? Are they saying, ignore what he's saying, he's not in the room, focus on the task before us?
So again, for the Iranians, they've kind of looked at the negotiations. And again, I've spoken to some of the Iranians who have been involved in this process, and they have looked at Donald Trump's posts and totally ignored them. They are not necessarily dealing with the threats. Of course, they respond to the threats, and they say that their armed forces are ready to respond in the event that Donald Trump follows through. But I think that by some account, I think there have been almost 7 different civilizational threats that Donald Trump has made against Iran, from like wiping out their civilization to sending them back to the Stone Ages to what we just heard right now, that you won't have an effing country to go back home to. I think ultimately the Iranians are kind of ignoring that noise and focusing on the words that are actually being put to paper inside the room. The question is, do the American negotiators, Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, J.D. Vance, do they actually have any power to make decisions without the approval of Donald Trump? Are they making decisions and commitments that Donald Trump ultimately will not agree to once he actually sees or begins to understand what that final text is? And I think right now that's why there is this optimism. There's an optimism in saying, okay, well, what they're saying in the room gives these negotiators a sense of hope that there is perhaps a way forward. When it comes back to Donald Trump, that's a whole different other ballgame. And what happens between Donald Trump and the Israeli prime minister, that is even yet another ballgame, because the Israelis right now at least are signaling to the Americans they will continue to operate in Lebanon. The conditions of the ceasefire do not apply to them and do not apply to Lebanon. And that the prime minister came out today and said quite openly, the Israeli military has complete free range to operate in Lebanon as they have been doing. That immediately is going to put a wrench, if you will, in those negotiations between the Iranians and the Americans.
I think what's so key about what you just said there is when you talk to folks who know Donald Trump and have known Donald Trump for decades even, he does not care how you get to a deal, right? Like when he was here in New York figuring out how to be a hotel magnate, he did not care how you got to the deal. He just wants the deal to happen. And so when you have folks like Jared Kushner and Vance and Witkoff and they're having those conversations, I've been told that they do have a lot more kind of leeway because for Donald Trump, it's like, get the deal done.
Yeah.
Right.
Especially because he's bored, as we've heard over and over again, with the Iranian negotiation.
Well, and that is part of where these threats are coming from. Richard Haass, this is what the president told a Fox reporter, quote, you close it and you won't have a country. You won't even make it back to your expletive country. Thank you, Ayman, for elucidating what that expletive was. We may take over the strait if we have to. If they don't make a deal, we'll collect tolls. The problem, Richard Haass says, was pointed out in the New York Times is, what is Iran supposed to be afraid of? The main forms of deterrence Trump still has available are unpopular at home, and the Iranians know that. He sort of has backed himself into a corner here.
Yeah, those words, those threats, quite honestly, are empty. They're meaningless. As Ayman said, the Iranians have learned to scout them. Look, the reason for optimism is that neither side sees much upside in a resumption of serious hostilities. The United States wants the strait open, wants energy prices to come down, wants to focus on other things. Iran also wants this, the Strait open, wants to start rebuilding its country. Plus, it's a really good deal for Iran. There's a lot of upside in it for Iran. So I don't take these threats at all seriously. No, so I think if your definition of optimism is that this thing is going to move ahead, I think it will. It's going to be rickety. You'll have in 60 days, Iran will introduce some tolls or whatever they'll call it with the Strait. As you already pointed out, Alicia, in your introduction, this is not going to cover important things like ballistic missiles or drones or support for Iranians' proxies. The nuclear negotiations are going to be long, take years and years, and there's always going to be questions about Iranian compliance, access of inspectors. This is the future. This is going to be the new normal, and Iran's going to benefit economically, which will strengthen the regime, and it'll give them the resources they need to do some of these things, like rebuild their military or help groups like Hezbollah. So, if your definition of optimism is this likely to move forward? Probably, again, unevenly. If your definition of optimism, will this leave us better off? Then I'm afraid the answer is no.
Well, and some of that unease and that lack of optimism has been echoed by Republicans on Capitol Hill. I want you, Richard, to take a listen to what some of them have said just in the past few days about this deal.
The Iranians have agreed to invite IAEA inspectors back into their country. That is a major milestone for the American people and the first step.
History demonstrates that sending billions of dollars to a theocratic lunatic who wants to murder us is a really bad idea.
Unfortunately, now Iran is going to have hundreds of millions of dollars to support its terrorist proxies, including Hezbollah. So I think that was a mistake.
Let's try a diplomatic solution. I think it's going to fail. If this deal fails, President Trump is going to take the Strait of Hormuz over by force. If Iran contests control of the Strait of Hormuz by the United States, we will obliterate them.
So I want to go back to your second definition of optimism, Richard Haass, which is if this, in fact, leaves the United States or the region, barring Iran, in a better state than Donald Trump found it. Is there anything that can happen in that room, in either of the rooms, as Ayman pointed out, that begins to move the negotiations in that direction, or given the basic framework that is at the table, are what we simply hoping for here is an off-ramp?
I think we're hoping for an off-ramp. I think what we can try to do through the negotiations is limit the cost of this venture. There's no way, though, we're going to come out through diplomacy with a Middle East that's better off. The Strait's not going to be more unconditionally open than it was. We're not going to have the Iranian nuclear program in better shape, and with better controls than existed. And we're obviously not going to be able to stop Iran's production of missiles or drones or support for proxies. So the short answer is no. What I'd really push back on, though, is what Senator Graham is saying, that if this doesn't work, then we've got these wonderful military options. I mean, really, it's time for people, I think, to get serious about what we ought to have learned over the last few months. We're not going to bomb our way to regime change. We're not going to bomb our way to capitulation. The idea that we can seize and control the Strait and keep it open and have it functioning, and not, among other things, see Iran attack the water and energy infrastructure of other countries in the region is a pipe dream. So I just don't take these criticisms sooner. What I really want to say is, where were they before this war started? A lot of this was predictable. So a lot of these criticisms, I would say, are a day late and a dollar short. They ought to have been voices against this war, because so much of what happened, Alicia, was predictable.
I mean, they're actually $300 billion short.
Yeah, and I was going to say, and to add to Richard's point, which is very important, is that part of the way that America historically has been able to shape a little bit of Iran's behavior or calculation was the idea of military force. It was a little bit of the deterrence that if you do not comply, if you do not do this, we can bring our military to bear. They've played that card. The Iranians have come out of this war saying, we have been able to withstand the might of two of the most powerful militaries in the world. The regime is intact, and coming out of it, we've been able to hit Arab allies, affect global markets, take control of the Strait of Hormuz. Hezbollah is still there. Hamas is still in Gaza. Our proxies are still in Yemen. So nothing that the Americans and the Israelis have done has been able to fundamentally change the composition of Iran up until this point, or even its calculation. Does that mean Iran is not weaker? No, it is weaker, but it's still able to withstand that might. And the other part of that equation is the fact that there are thresholds that have been crossed that haven't been crossed before. I mean, a week ago, the U.S. president was boasting about how the Iranian military was completely destroyed. They shot down an American helicopter not too long ago. They attacked Kuwait and killed a civilian not too long ago. They attacked Israel a week ago or 2 weeks ago. So my point is that Iran still has capabilities. I haven't spoken to a single military official, an ex-military official on our air, who hasn't told me that the idea of trying to physically take control of the Strait of Hormuz would require hundreds of thousands of American troops deep inside Iran to be able to push back Iranian drones and capabilities that could be launched from inside Iran across the Strait of Hormuz. It doesn't need hundreds of thousands of Iranian troops. It needs like a couple of barrel bombs thrown into the sea to shut that Strait of Hormuz down, as we've seen over the last several months.